July 20th, 1944. At the German 7th Army headquarters in Le Mans, France, General Friedrich Dollmann had just been replaced. His successor, SS General Paul Hauser, reviewed the latest intelligence reports with disbelief. 6 weeks after D-Day, American supply operations were moving at a pace that defied everything the Wehrmacht believed possible. In the margins of his briefing notes later found in captured archives, an officer had scribbled in frustration, "The Americans are running field bakeries only 15 kilometers from the front lines. This must be either propaganda or some new kind of supply revolution we do not understand." Radio intercepts and frontline observer reports confirmed it. Even while locked in the brutal hedgerow battles of Normandy, U.S. troops were receiving more than ammunition and fuel. They were also being delivered hot meals, fresh bread, mail from home, and, almost unbelievably, donuts served by Red Cross women in uniform. The first Red Cross Clubmobile had arrived only days earlier, on July 16th. These converted trucks, staffed by American female volunteers, were given precious shipping space to cross the Atlantic. To the German army, which had stripped soldiers of nearly all comforts in the name of efficiency, this was madness. But what they were really seeing was American industry applied directly to warfare. The ability to deliver coffee and donuts under fire was not indulgence. It was proof that unlimited ammunition and fuel would also arrive. German faith in American logistical weakness went back years. Since 1940, Wehrmacht intelligence had carefully studied U.S. doctrine and always dismissed it as fragile. Colonel Alexis von Roen, head of Foreign Armies West, regularly reported that Americans were dependent on material comfort and could not fight without it. The math appeared to confirm their bias. U.S. planning documents captured during the Sicily campaign showed American troops required 45 pounds of supplies per soldier daily. By comparison, Wehrmacht allocations ranged from 3 pounds in quiet conditions to 20 pounds during combat. German officers who had survived the Russian front saw this as softness. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, Commander-in-Chief West, expressed the typical German view in May 1944. According to later testimony from his chief of staff, General Günther Blumentritt, Rundstedt declared, "The Americans require 3 times our supply tonnage. They think war is material. We have proven in Russia that willpower defeats material. When their fragile supply system meets the reality of war, it will collapse." This was not propaganda. It reflected the German way of war. Wehrmacht doctrine emphasized improvisation, initiative, and austerity. German soldiers were trained to live off the land, fight when cut off, and keep operating even without resupply. The fact that Americans insisted on maintaining supply chains for what Germans called luxuries, chocolate, cigarettes, stationery, seemed to prove the Nazi line that democracies were decadent. German supply officers even calculated the invasion's supposed impossibility. Captured records show that Major Heinrich von Stülpenagel of Army Group B's logistics staff presented a study. Supplying 12 divisions across beaches would require 8,400 tons per day. No force in history had ever landed even half that amount without established ports. His conclusion: mathematically impossible. What the Wehrmacht failed to grasp was the sheer scale of American preparation. For 2 years, the U.S. had turned Britain into what Eisenhower called one gigantic military base. By June 1944, 5 million tons of supplies had been stockpiled, enough to fill a freight train stretching from London to Edinburgh and back. The invasion fleet on June 6th was the largest naval operation in history. 6,139 vessels, including 4,126 landing craft. Hidden among them were innovations the Germans never imagined. Some LSTs, landing ship tank, were converted into floating kitchens. They carried ovens that baked bread at sea and refrigeration units to keep food fresh. LST-357 had chilled holds kept at 32 degrees during the Channel crossing. LST-491 carried a complete field bakery that was operating within hours of beaching. German E-boat patrols even noted strange ships in their diaries. Corvette Captain Friedrich Hoffmann, commander of E-boat Flotilla S-130, wrote, "Observed unusual vessels in Allied convoy appear to be modified merchant ships painted gray. Smoke observed as if from factory vessels." He was unknowingly describing ships baking bread. By June 26th, just 20 days after D-Day, the impossible had been done. Without a single major port, American forces were landing 15,000 tons of supplies every day across the Normandy beaches. For comparison, the entire German Army Group B in France was receiving only 8,000 tons per week. Quartermaster records show that by this date, mobile bakeries at Omaha and Utah beaches were producing 60,000 loaves of fresh bread daily, not hard rations like German troops received, but white and wheat bread still warm delivered each morning to combat units. German officers were stunned. Helmut Gaulke, intelligence officer of the 352nd Infantry Division, reported on June 28th. American soldiers in forward positions are supplied with canned meat, vegetables, crackers, candy, and cigarettes. Each meal contains more variety than our troops have seen in months. They throw away half-eaten rations that our men would treat as a feast. By June 30th, the numbers spoke for themselves. 71,000 vehicles landed, 48,000 tons of supplies unloaded, and 97 supply dumps already operating inside the beachhead. By comparison, the German invasion of Norway in 1940, conducted through captured ports and against weak opposition, had required 3 weeks to reach the same level. German planners had also dismissed the Allied artificial harbors, the Mulberries. Aerial reconnaissance spotted their parts being built, but Admiral Friedrich Ruge, naval advisor to Army Group B, assured his commanders, theoretically possible, but limited. Channel tides and Atlantic storms will restrict them. Maximum capacity 1,000 tons daily. The reality was very different. By June 18th, the American Mulberry A at Omaha was already landing 3,000 tons per day, soon increasing to 7,000, 7 times the German estimate. The Mulberry Harbor was unlike anything the Germans had ever seen. It was built with 600,000 tons of concrete, 180,000 tons of steel, and floating roadways strong enough to handle 2,000 vehicles every single day. German officers who observed it through binoculars could hardly believe their eyes. Oberst Hans von Luck, whose 21st Panzer Division was stationed near the British Mulberry B, later recalled in his memoirs, "We watched through field glasses as an entire harbor appeared out of nothing. Ships unloaded directly onto floating roads that rose and fell with the tides. Trucks drove straight from ship to shore without pause. In only 1 week, the Allies had built port facilities greater than many long-established French harbors." The effect was not just practical, it was psychological. The Mulberries showed not only logistical strength but engineering supremacy. If the Allies could create working harbors on empty beaches, what limits did they actually have? July 16, 1944 became another turning point in the history of military supply. On that day, the first Red Cross Clubmobile rolled onto French soil. The truck, nicknamed Daniel Boone, landed at Utah Beach and within hours was handing out fresh donuts and hot coffee to soldiers still in combat zones. At first, German intelligence refused to believe it. Oberst Friedrich von Mellenthin, intelligence officer with Panzer Group West, dismissed the reports in his July 20th briefing. Stories of American women serving food in battle areas are either false or prove American command incompetence for putting civilians at risk. But the stories were real. Within 1 week, 12 clubmobiles were working in Normandy. These GMC trucks were specially fitted with donut machines, coffee urns, and serving counters. Each one could produce 2,000 donuts and 500 gallons of coffee every day. Crews of 3 American women followed the advancing troops, often within range of German artillery fire. Captured American letters confirmed the effect on morale. Private James Morrison of the 4th Infantry Division wrote to his mother on July 22nd. That letter, later found on his body after the Battle of St. Lo, read, "You won't believe this, Mom, but yesterday I had fresh donuts and real coffee served by American girls just like back home. We were maybe 5 miles from the front. The Germans were shelling the road behind us and these girls just laughed and handed out donuts like it was a Sunday social." By August 25, 1944, when U.S. forces liberated Paris, German supply officers faced a problem they could not solve. The U.S. Third Army under General Patton was advancing at a speed that broke every rule of Wehrmacht logistics. German doctrine, proven on the Eastern Front, said mechanized forces could not operate more than 200 miles from their bases without stopping for resupply. On August 24th, General der Panzertruppe Heinrich Eberbach reported to OKW in a message later captured in archives. American spearheads are now 400 miles from their landing beaches. By all calculations, they must stop within 48 hours to rebuild supply. But 1 day later, German scouts witnessed something entirely new. A constant stream of trucks moving along specially marked one-way roads running day and night. The Red Ball Express had begun, and with it, German assumptions collapsed. The Red Ball Express was a logistics system beyond anything the Wehrmacht could imagine. According to official Transportation Corps records, 5958 trucks driven by 23,000 men hauled up to 12,342 tons of supplies daily, with the peak reached on August 29th. The route covered 700 miles round trip and the operation was continuous. Drivers were swapped like relay runners, trucks were repaired on the move, and the flow never stopped. About 75% of the drivers were African American soldiers, placed in segregated units but carrying the bulk of the supply effort that kept the front advancing. Trucks averaged 240 miles daily, while drivers often got no more than 4 hours of sleep. Wehrmacht logistics tables captured later showed their rigid calculations. A mechanized division needed 300 tons of supply per day in combat, 100 tons when idle. Capacity dropped 30% for every 100 kilometers from the base, and beyond 300 kilometers, sustained offensives were deemed impossible. The Americans broke all those limits. By September 1944, they were moving 20,000 tons daily to forces 500 miles from the beaches. A single U.S. armored division consumed 750 tons every day and received it without fail. The First Army alone was burning 800,000 gallons of gasoline daily, more than the entire Wehrmacht on the Western Front consumed in a week. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commander of what was left of a panzer division, described the frustration in a captured letter to his wife. "We are no longer fighting soldiers. We are fighting an industrial process. They do not defeat us in battle, they crush us with trucks." By September, German intelligence also picked up reports of another astonishing project: fuel pipelines being laid under the English Channel, directly from Britain to France. The system, codenamed PLUTO, Pipeline Under the Ocean, sounded like science fiction to German officers who were still moving fuel in horse-drawn wagons. Major Hans Klein, a Wehrmacht engineer responsible for fuel depots across Europe, analyzed the reports in a September 10th memo to OKW, later found in archives at Aachen. Pipeline construction requires specialty steel, precision joints, and pumping stations every 30 kilometers. The Americans claim to lay 50 kilometers per day with prefabricated pipe. This exceeds our peak construction rate tenfold. It cannot be real. But it was real. The first PLUTO line went into service on September 22nd, delivering 56,000 gallons daily to Cherbourg. By October, with more lines in place, output had risen to 300,000 gallons per day. By March 1945, the system reached full capacity of 1 million gallons daily, more than the fuel needs of entire German army groups combined. The psychological shock on German commanders was severe. General Hermann Balck, one of Germany's most respected field leaders, later admitted in interrogation, "When we learned they were pumping fuel from England directly into their tanks, we knew the war was finished. You cannot fight an enemy who erases geography." The ultimate display of American logistics came on Thanksgiving Day, 1944. U.S. armies stretched from Holland to Switzerland, yet the Quartermaster Corps attempted something no military had ever tried: serving a full holiday meal to every single soldier in Europe, nearly 2 million men, on the same day. German intelligence at first thought it was a trick. General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, preparing for the Ardennes offensive, received a November 20th report from his G2 section. Agents report massive shipments of frozen turkeys for American troops. This is likely deception to hide offensive preparations. It was not deception. The cargo ship SS Great Republic had sailed from New York on October 15th, with 1,604 tons of frozen turkeys, arriving at Le Havre on November 16th. Other ships brought cranberries, sweet potatoes, pumpkins, and every traditional food for the holiday. Special refrigerated trains and trucks moved the supplies from ports to the front, while keeping everything fresh. On Thanksgiving Day, American soldiers across Europe sat down to hot turkey dinners, even in foxholes under fire. To the Germans, the message was unmistakable. Their opponents had not only mastered logistics, they had turned it into a weapon that no army in the world could match. On November 23, 1944, American soldiers dug into foxholes along the Siegfried Line, sat down to a full Thanksgiving meal. They were served turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes, cranberry sauce, and pumpkin pie, even while German artillery fire continued in the distance. The 30th Infantry Division, positioned near Aachen, received complete hot dinners despite ongoing shelling. What the soldiers didn't realize was that this simple act carried unintended psychological impact. Captured Americans later described the meal during interrogations, unintentionally revealing to German officers just how strong U.S. supply lines were. For the Germans, already struggling with shortages, this was deeply demoralizing. The winter of 1944-45 turned out to be the coldest in half a century. German commanders expected U.S. forces to collapse in the cold, just as the Wehrmacht had in Russia. The Ardennes offensive itself was partly built on the assumption that Americans couldn't equip their troops with winter gear fast enough. That assumption was wrong. Within just 3 weeks, U.S. supply operations delivered 2 million sets of winter clothing. These included advanced gear the Germans had never seen, layered uniforms, shoe packs with removable felt liners, sleeping bags rated to 30 Guderian, and compact squad stoves. Reports from General der Infanterie Baptist Kneis, commander of the German LXK Corps, show the contrast. In December 1944, his communications to Army Group B described how American forces in Bastogne were being supplied by air, even under full encirclement. Cargo containers delivered medical kits, ammunition, clothing, and even soldiers' mail. Meanwhile, his own unit still lacked proper winter equipment. The Bastogne airlift highlighted the scale of U.S. logistical power. C-47 transport aircraft dropped 1,746 tons of supplies in just 8 days to the surrounded 101st Airborne Division. Parachutes were color-coded for efficiency: red for ammunition, blue for medical items, yellow for food, white for winter clothing. The precision and volume of these drops exceeded the total capacity of the entire German airborne resupply system on the Western Front. By March 1945, American forces reached the Rhine River, Germany's last major natural defensive barrier. German planning based on their own 1940 campaigns assumed that crossing a river of this size would take weeks of preparation. On March 1st, General Oberst Johannes Blaskowitz told the German High Command that the Rhine would give them valuable time to regroup. Just 7 days later, the U.S. 9th Armored Division captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen intact. Within 24 hours, American engineers stabilized the damaged structure and were sending 1,000 vehicles across every hour. Remagen, however, was only the beginning. In the following 10 days, U.S. engineers built 62 bridges across the Rhine, on average one every 4 hours. The largest, a 100-foot floating treadway bridge at Oppenheim, became operational in just 10 hours. These weren't makeshift solutions. They were permanent crossings capable of handling 70-ton tank transporters. German engineer officer Major Klaus Fuber, stationed at Mainz, later testified, "The Americans threw bridges across the Rhine like ladders across a stream. Each crossing had traffic control, repair teams, and anti-aircraft defenses. If one bridge was destroyed, 2 others already carried the load." By the time of Germany's surrender on May 8, 1945, U.S. logistical performance had no precedent in military history. The Transportation Corps and Quartermaster Corps delivered staggering quantities: 7 million measurement tons of cargo shipped across the Atlantic. 37 million vehicles, 21 million jerry cans, 570,000 GMC 2, 5-ton trucks 2, 4 billion individual rations, 800 million packs of cigarettes, 500 million candy bars, and 11 billion rounds of ammunition. Monthly usage by spring 1945 reached 2 million tons of supplies, 50 million gallons of fuel, and 8,000 tons of ammunition consumed daily during major offensives. To the Germans, these numbers weren't just statistics. They were proof that the U.S. approach had changed the very nature of warfare. Wehrmacht doctrine valued speed, surprise, and tactical precision, but against an enemy with limitless resources delivered efficiently, those qualities no longer guaranteed success. Post-war interrogations recorded by the U.S. Army Historical Division make this clear. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring admitted in 1947 that U.S. supply achievements exceeded German estimates by 5 to 10 times. German defensive plans were built on assumptions about U.S. limits that simply didn't exist. In his words, a German division at 50% supply was considered combat ready. Americans would not attack without 200% reserves. Heinz Guderian, the architect of Blitzkrieg, later wrote that Germany had contributed tactical innovation. But the Americans brought something greater: the ability to sustain operations indefinitely. We could win battles, he admitted, but they could feed armies. In the end, that was what mattered. General Franz Halder, former chief of the German General Staff, framed it as a philosophical shift. Germany saw logistics as supporting combat. The U.S. saw combat as the means of delivering logistics. In his words, they didn't defeat our army. They buried it in abundance. Japanese military leaders reached the same conclusion. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had predicted before Pearl Harbor that Japan could dominate for only 6 months before American industry overwhelmed them. After the war, General Yoshijiro Umezu explained that Japanese planners searched for weaknesses in U.S. island-hopping tactics, but found none. Every battle was decided before it began, in the factories and the cargo ships, he observed. American bases thousands of miles from home delivered more supplies than Japan could move within 50 miles. The lesson applied everywhere. Whether in Europe's forests or the Pacific's atolls, U.S. forces carried supply superiority that redefined what was possible in modern warfare. And the revolution came not from flashy innovations, but from practical ones: standardization, mass production, and an unbroken chain of delivery that no opponent could match. Every American vehicle in World War II was built with standardized, interchangeable parts. This meant that a truck damaged in Italy could be repaired using spare parts shipped from France. German forces, on the other hand, struggled constantly with compatibility problems, since their equipment came from many different conquered nations. Mechanization gave the Americans another decisive edge. While Germany still relied on 750,000 horses to haul supplies, requiring 20,000 tons of fodder every month, the United States depended on trucks. This eliminated the need to transport food for animals and, at the same time, delivered more speed and carrying power. Preservation was another American advantage. The U.S. pioneered military refrigeration, keeping supply chains cold all the way from factories in America to frontline units. Soldiers received fresh meat, blood plasma, and medicines that were impossible for other armies to maintain in usable condition. Communication also mattered. In France alone, American forces laid 100,000 meters of telephone wire, allowing real-time coordination of supply deliveries. By contrast, German logistics still relied on motorcycle couriers, often causing delays of several days. Specialization was built into the American system. They developed vehicles designed for specific tasks: refrigerated trucks, tankers, mobile workshops. German forces tried to make do with generic vehicles for everything, which cut their efficiency in half. A rarely acknowledged factor behind American logistics was the role of women. While German ideology confined women to traditional duties, 150,000 American women served in the Women's Army Corps, WAC. Thousands of them worked directly in logistics. They ran communication centers that coordinated supply movements, tracked depot inventories, and operated punch card systems handling millions of items. At ports of embarkation, WAC personnel processed shipping records that baffled German officers used to a male-only military. Lieutenant Colonel Elna Hilliard, who commanded WAC operations in the European theater, led more people than most German regiment commanders. Her post-war report noted that WAC units processed 40% of all supply documentation in the ETO. By taking on these roles, they freed thousands of men for combat and boosted efficiency with their specialized training. This integration doubled U.S. effectiveness by using resources Germany refused to consider. The results went beyond numbers; they affected morale. For German troops, American abundance was a form of psychological warfare. Soldiers who had not seen chocolate since 1942 could smell it on captured Americans. Wehrmacht units living on bread extended with sawdust overheard U.S. troops complaining about boring K-rations that still contained more variety than they had seen in years. Captured letters reveal the impact. One written by German soldier Wilhelm Hoffmann in December 1944, found in a destroyed bunker, told his wife, "The Americans we captured are better fed as prisoners than we are as soldiers. They throw away half-eaten chocolate bars. They clean their rifles with white bread. We are fighting the entire wealth of America." Even senior commanders admitted the psychological toll. General der Infanterie Hans Schmidt testified in 1947, "My soldiers fought bravely despite impossible odds. But when they realized Americans received ice cream and mail while we lacked ammunition and medical supplies, morale collapsed. No fighting spirit can survive that kind of disparity. For German officers who had seen American logistics firsthand, the Marshall Plan of 1947 was no surprise. They had already witnessed the U.S. deliver unlimited resources across oceans. General Lucius Clay, military governor of the American occupation zone, even employed former Wehrmacht logistics officers to help rebuild Germany. Colonel Hans von Greifenberg, once chief of staff to Army Group Center, later remarked, "Americans applied the same logistics principles to peace that had won them the war: standardization, mechanization, communication, and abundance." The Marshall Plan was essentially military supply methods redirected to civilian reconstruction. When North Korea invaded the South in June 1950, American troops initially struggled in combat, but within weeks U.S. logistics dominance reasserted itself. Former German officers serving NATO noticed the familiar pattern. General Adolf Heusinger, once Wehrmacht operations chief and later NATO's military committee chairman, explained, "In Korea, Americans again proved that supply superiority wins modern wars. They delivered more tonnage to Busan in 3 months than Germany delivered to Stalingrad in 2 years. The communists could win battles, but they could not compete with American logistics." By the 1960s, Harvard Business School began studying these wartime systems as the foundation of modern supply chain management. Professor Theodore Levitt traced a direct line from U.S. military practices to civilian business logistics. Container shipping, just-in-time delivery, computerized inventory, and total quality management all had roots in American military logistics from 1942 to 1945. D-Day did not just liberate France. It also launched the methods that shaped global commerce for decades. Even the Soviet Union, though an ally, was stunned by U.S. supply capability. Marshal Georgy Zhukov, who had received massive Lend-Lease aid, admitted in private memoirs released after 1991, "Americans delivered 500,000 vehicles to us, more than our entire production." But what impressed me more was the delivery system. They shipped from Detroit to Vladivostok to Moscow with precision we could not achieve from Moscow to Stalingrad. Marshal Ivan Konev was even blunter in private correspondence. "If we fight America, it is not their army we face, but their factories. They can deliver more to the far side of the earth than we can deliver within our own borders." That is not military superiority, it is industrial transcendence. To achieve this dominance, the U.S. had to manage information on an unprecedented scale. Punch card systems, largely operated by WAC personnel, became the largest data processing network of the era. IBM machines tracked millions of items from factory to foxhole. Every bullet, bandage, and boot was recorded and traced. This military demand drove the development of modern computing. As Thomas Watson Jr., IBM president and former Army Air Forces officer, later stated, "The requirements of military logistics created both the market and the technology for business computing." The information age of warfare began not in laboratories but inside quartermaster depots. To see how much American logistics changed the nature of conflict, compare Normandy in 1944 to Germany's own campaign in France in 1940. When German forces invaded France, they moved an average of 3,000 tons of supplies per day, mostly by rail. By the 20th day, even after seizing French stockpiles, their system had collapsed into a supply crisis. Horse-drawn columns could cover just 12 miles a day. Now compare that to Normandy. In 1944, American forces delivered an average of 15,000 tons per day, across beaches with no established ports. And instead of slowing down, the flow increased steadily for 90 days. Their motorized convoys pushed 240 miles daily. This was a 5-fold increase in tonnage combined with a 20-fold jump in speed, an operational pace Germany could not dream of matching. Even Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, who rarely missed a chance to criticize U.S. tactics, admitted in his memoirs, "American logistics was a decisive weapon, more powerful than any secret project Germany ever produced. They could plan any operation because they could supply it. Others had to shape strategy around shortages. The Americans had complete freedom of action, and that came from sheer industrial abundance." Winston Churchill captured the point in one sentence. "The Americans proved that in modern war the factory is mightier than the fortress, the supply line stronger than the front line. Their monument is not battles won, but supplies delivered under fire." Even Charles de Gaulle, proud defender of French military tradition, conceded that America's edge was not superior generalship, but superior supply. He argued this was even more impressive. Tactics can be learned, but no nation could simply copy America's vast industrial strength. This logistics revolution permanently reshaped war. Every army since has faced the same choice: either match American supply power or accept strategic inferiority. The Gulf War, Afghanistan, and Iraq all followed the same pattern set in 1944. U.S. forces sometimes faced tactical problems, but their logistical dominance guaranteed strategic success. During Operation Desert Storm, the United States deployed 500,000 troops to Saudi Arabia, and they were better supplied there than Iraqi soldiers inside their own country. In 2001, when American soldiers in remote Afghan outposts ate full Thanksgiving dinners, they were living proof that the systems first tested at Normandy were still at work. On March 7, 1984, the 40th anniversary of the capture of Remagen Bridge, veterans from both sides gathered at the site. Former General Major Rudolf Langheuser, who once defended the bridge, stood beside former Captain George Gibbs, whose company seized it. At age 75, Langheuser admitted, "We prepared for American tanks, artillery, and aircraft. We did not prepare for American abundance. Your logistics defeated us before your soldiers arrived. An army that can deliver ice cream to the front while we lacked bandages for the wounded cannot be beaten by conventional means." Captain Gibbs, then 73, answered with simple pragmatism, "General, we figured any soldier asked to die for his country deserved at least a good meal first. Well-fed soldiers fight better than hungry ones." The two men shook hands across the memorial, acknowledging a truth beyond nationality. In industrial warfare, supply superiority is military supremacy. The scale of American achievement in Europe is best shown in hard numbers. Transportation assets included 570,000 GMC-2, 5-ton trucks. They shipped 21 million jerry cans, 160,000 railway cars, and 2,000 locomotives. Engineers built 62 Rhine bridges in just 10 days. One bridge every 4 hours. Peak supply delivery hit 20,000 tons per day in September 1944. Across the entire campaign, 7 million measurement tons were delivered. Pipelines carried 172 million gallons of fuel. Signal units laid 100,000 meters of telephone wire. The postal system delivered 5 billion pieces of mail. The human scale was equally massive. 2 million troops supplied without pause. 500,000 vehicles kept running. 23,000 Red Ball Express drivers operating nonstop. 150,000 Women's Army Corps personnel in direct logistics support, and 75% of truck drivers African American. These were not just statistics. They marked the moment warfare itself became industrialized. German officers saw combat supported by logistics. Americans saw combat as the tool to extend logistics. This shift in perspective was more decisive than any battlefield tactic. The same German commanders who dismissed American supply demands in 1943 lived to see those very systems rebuild their country under the Marshall Plan. The machinery that had delivered destruction proved equally capable of delivering reconstruction. Germany's military tradition had long emphasized strategy and battlefield brilliance, from Clausewitz to Moltke, from Schlieffen to Guderian. But its greatest lesson came from defeat. By 1945, they learned that in industrial war, the supply line is not just support. It is the battle itself. The Wehrmacht entered the war believing logistics supported operations. They ended the war realizing operations existed to deliver logistics. America had not triumphed through better tactics, but through better feeding, better fueling, and better transport. General Franz Halder summarized it best. We Germans asked, "How can we win this battle?" The Americans asked, "How can we supply this army?" We focused on operations. They focused on process. History shows who chose correctly. By 1945, the same German officers who once mocked American supply chains had become their most vocal witnesses. Their experience revealed the defining truth of modern conflict. In the industrial age, logistics is not part of military power. It is military power. The rest is just supply.